The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. It's the 21st of March 2015. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. I'm your host Walter. If you go to UCY.tv, 3 letters, UCY.tv, mouse over shows, you can see a list of available radio events. And if you click on any of them, you end up in a separate page which has podcasts available for download from that specific show, but also a chat room where you can talk to other people, like there are Fatmine1, something like that, 8 Hawks, Dell, Dan Defiant, Joe and Jules, Road Dog, and One Unknown. Welcome, everybody. How are you doing? So, last week you had a repeat from Gino Denning because the confusing time differences. In the United States it's already what they call summertime, while here in the Netherlands we get that like in 2 or 3 weeks or so. I think it's a stupid thing. It gives everybody a jet lag, so that's not so good. And they call it daylight savings, right? As if you save anything, as if the day now is longer. It's still 24 hours, you know. It's just stupid. So, well, today we're going to continue then where we left off 2 weeks ago, which is reading from The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose. Now, I cleared all my history, just cleaning up the drive and stuff. So I think we were here somewhere at, about halfway. And it goes like this. I think I already did this, didn't I? Well, if we did, I'll scroll down some more. Yeah, I should probably scroll down some more. I think here. Violent confrontations can be quite stressful, even when the individual feels entirely justified. Blah blah. Such as when defending his family from an attacker. But to engage in mortal combat where no one, including the combatant, seemed to have any clear idea what the purpose or justification for the conflict is, as that's good to hear, damn defiant, as occurred in Vietnam, seems to add to an additional degree of psychological trauma. Yeah, so the most dangerous superstition is that of the belief in authority. And so this goes into the effects that it has. All right? As many combat soldiers have attested to, once in the hell of war, any vague but noble cause or justification for the fight is usually forgotten. Yeah, we did this last week. So let me scroll some more, guys. Yep. Where were we? Let's try this. The effects on actual criminals. Alright, I'm quite sure we didn't do that. So we might have skipped maybe a couple of sentences, but this is about where we were. Ironically, in situations where obedience would actually improve human behavior, authority has no effect. Those individuals, for example, whose own consciences do not stop them from robbing or assaulting their neighbors because they do not care about the usual standards of right and wrong, also do not care what authority tells them to do. Yeah, that's right. This just reminds me of what I think is one of the most strong arguments in favor of giving everybody a gun, or against gun control, so to speak, is that criminals don't care about the law. You know, that's one of the most strong arguments, I guess. It is only those who are trying to be good who ever feel compelled to obey authority. The belief in authority is a belief about morality. It is the idea that obedience is morally good. To those who do not care about what is deemed good, the very people whose consciences are not enough to make them behave in a civilized manner, the myth of the authority has no effect. Yes. To put it another way, only those who do not need to be controlled, in other words, those already trying to live moral lives, feel an obligation to obey the controllers. Meanwhile, those who pose a real threat to peaceful society feel no moral obligation to obey any authority anyway. Generally speaking, all commands from authority, including inherently justifiable commands such as do not steal and do not murder, are always either unnecessary when directed at good people or ineffectual when directed at bad people. Yeah, another very strong argument. It is difficult to imagine any situation in which an individual would otherwise have no qualms about committing theft, assault or murder, but would feel guilty about violating laws which prohibit such actions. Yes. A distinction should be made here between moral obligation and fear of retaliation. A thief who feels no moral obligation to refrain from stealing will also feel no moral obligation to obey laws against stealing. However, if he perceives a threat to his own safety, whether from the police or anyone else, he might be deterred from robbing someone. Yeah, like an armed citizenry. But that deterrent effect comes entirely from the threat of violence, not from the claimed authority underlying the threat. This means that supposed authority is never what stops actual crimes from happening, and that an effective deterrent system does not require authority at all. This is discussed further in detail below, because we're now moving on to part 3D, which is called the effects of the myth on the spectators. The sin of non-resistance is the next heading. It is obvious that the belief in authority affects the perceptions and actions of law enforcers, and also affects the perceptions and actions of those against whom laws are enforced. But even the perceptions and actions of the onlookers, those who are not directly involved, also play a huge role in determining the state of human society. More specifically, the inaction of spectators who quietly allow legal coercion to be inflicted upon others has an enormous impact. History is full of examples proving that Edmund Burke, that's B-U-R-K-E, Edmund Burke, was right when he said that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Yeah, that's my way of rebelling against all this anti-smoking stuff. I smoke on air. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Even at work, people are using this impairment on freedom. Is that correct English anyway? Impairment on freedom, restriction on freedom. That people are now not allowed to smoke here, not allowed to smoke there, and so people are being set up against each other like that, So that's very annoying, and we never used to have troubles with non-smokers nagging about, you're blowing smoke in the air. Never heard that complaint. But now that they feel backed by some strange quote-unquote authority, they start, attacking smokers. Restriction. Thank you, Joe. Yes. So, I smoke on air. I just rolled another cigarette. And I'm gonna light that up. Yeah. Here we go. So, the mass murder committed. No, this is just a very cheap quote-unquote reusable lighter. My other one is over here. This is also not a Zippo though. This is one of those Ronson things that makes a flame that can't be blown out by the wind. You guys probably know what kind of lighter that is. Alright, where were we? The mass murder committed by the regimes of Stalin, Mao, Hitler, and many others was made possible not just by the willingness of the enforcers to carry out their orders, but also by their victims' imagined obligation to obey authority, and by the belief held by almost all onlookers that they should not interfere with the law being carried out. The perpetrators of mass injustice, including mass murder, are always hugely outnumbered by their victims. And if you add in the number of spectators, all those people who could have intervened, it becomes obvious how significant the action or inaction of mere spectators can be. Of course, some people will fail to intervene in a situation simply as a result of basic fear. A witness to a mugging who does not dare to interfere is not condoning mugging by his inaction. He simply values the benefit to his own safety that comes from inaction more than he values whatever benefit he thinks he could be to the victim by stepping in. But there are many cases in which the belief in authority makes people hesitate to get involved in a conflict, not just out of fear, but out of a deep psychological aversion to going against authority. There are two ways this can cause spectators to stand idle by while legal injustice is inflicted upon someone else. 1. The spectator can believe that the injustice is actually a good thing because it is the law. Or 2. The spectator can disapprove, but his willingness to actually act out against law enforcers or even to speak out against authority is stifled by his trained-in subservience. Either way, the outcome is the same. The spectator does nothing to stop the injustice, but the two phenomena will be addressed separately. Alright, next heading. Vincent pasted a link in the chat, larkinrose.com, check it out. The next heading is imagining legal evil to be good. There are literally millions, that's probably millions of examples. Minions, right? It's kind of like on topic, but there are literally millions of examples that could be used to demonstrate how the perception of the general public is dramatically affected by the belief in authority. Yes. Just consider how the average person views and judges an act when it is committed by one claiming to be authority, as opposed to how he views and judges the exact same when it is committed by anyone else. Here are a few examples. Scenario A. An American soldier in a foreign country is going house to house, kicking in doors, carrying a machine gun and pointing it at complete strangers, ordering them around and interrogating them while searching for insurgents. Scenario B. An average citizen in his own country is going house to house, kicking in doors, carrying a machine gun and pointing it at complete strangers, ordering them around and interrogating them while searching for people he doesn't like. Right? You get the picture here, right? The first is viewed by most people to be a brave soldier serving his country, while the latter is viewed as a horribly dangerous, probably mentally disturbed individual who should be disarmed and subdued at all costs. Yeah. Scenario A is a second example. An officer of the law is manning a sobriety checkpoint or a border checkpoint, stopping everyone to ask if they are in the country legally, or if they have been drinking, or to otherwise see if any indication or evidence of criminal activity can be found. Scenario B. A man without a badge is stopping every car that drives down his street, asking every driver if he is an American, asking whether he has been drinking, and looking into his car for anything that appears suspicious. Alright? The cop who engages in such intrusive, obnoxious harassment, detainment, interrogation, and searching is viewed by many as a brave law enforcer doing his job, while anyone else behaving that way would be viewed as psychotic and dangerous. 3. Next example. Scenario A. A child protective services worker receives a case file and, based upon an anonymous tip, shows up at a house to question the homeowners, with the stated purpose of deciding whether they are fit parents or whether the state should forcibly take their children away from them. Scenario B. An average person, based upon a rumor he heard from a stranger, shows up at a home of other strangers, asking them questions and threatening to take their children away if the questioner is not satisfied with the answer. Again, the government worker is imagined to just be doing his job, while the average individual who does the same thing is seen as a dangerous, probably mentally unstable person. This is not to say that there could never be a situation in which a child should be taken away from his parents for the child's own protection, but such matters would be taken extremely seriously by any individual who had to take personal responsibility for his actions. A bureaucrat who is merely acting as a cog in the machine of government, on the other hand, will do such things with far less hesitation and less justification, because he will imagine that something called the law is solely responsible for whatever he does. Alright, next. Number 4, Scenario A. A pilot in the United States Air Force, having been given orders to do so, flies to the proper coordinates and delivers his payload to the intended target. The result is that some mercenaries of a different authority are killed, along with a number of civilians who happen to be in the area. Scenario B. An American citizen, acting on his own, loads up a plane with homemade explosives, flies over a building in the city where a vicious street gang is known to reside, and drops the ordnance. The result is that several gang members are killed, as are a dozen innocent bystanders who happen to be passing by on the street. The average American views the civilian casualties from the first scenario as unfortunate, but chalks them up to the hazards of war. The military pilot is viewed as a hero for having served his country and is given a medal. In the latter scenario, however, the average American views the pilot as a lunatic, a terrorist and a murderer, and demands that he be put in prison for the rest of his life. Whether an act has been formally declared legal by politicians and whether it is being done at the behest of authority has a huge impact on the perceived morality and legitimacy of the act. Yeah, which is ridiculous, right? That should come from people's own inside. In a very real sense, those who do the bidding of authority are not even regarded as people, in that their behaviors and actions are judged by such a drastically different standard from those of average human beings. As another example, a lot of people would be alarmed at the report of a man with a gun in their neighborhood, unless they heard that the man also had a badge. Yeah. People judge behavior based largely upon whether such behavior has been authorized or forbidden by authority, rather than whether the behavior was inherently legitimate. When citizens are called into an authoritarian court to serve as jurors in a criminal trial, for example, it is routine for the judge to tell the jury that they are not to concern themselves with whether the accused did anything wrong. They are to decide only whether or not his actions were in accordance with whatever the judge declares the law to be. Of note, those in positions of power have, over the years, deliberately and methodically worn away at an old tradition known as jury nullification, whereby a jury could, in essence, overturn what they viewed as a bad law by returning a verdict of not guilty, even if they believed the accused had broken the law. Every jury still has that power, but authoritarian judges do everything they can to keep jurors from realizing it. Yes, thank you, Vince. Even when not on a jury, most people still judge others through authoritarian colored glasses, judging the goodness of another based heavily upon whether he obeys the commands of politicians, whether he is a law-abiding taxpayer. Compare how the average citizen would view the two individuals described below. Individual A has no driver's license, works under the table to avoid paying taxes, never registered for the selective services. I don't know what that is. What's that, guys? Selective services. Owns an unregistered, unlicensed firearm, occasionally smokes pot, sometimes gambles, brackets open illegally, brackets close. And lives in a cabin which he owns, but for which he has no occupancy permit. Well, don't do that, Vince. It's probably too late with that. You know, Facebook is about enough for, I'm guessing you use that. You know, don't go into others' radio stations' chat. I don't appreciate that. I don't like it when they do it here also. So, thank you, Dan. Walter, he says, Walter, selective services means conscription into the military. All right. Now, to individual B. He has a driver's license, pays taxes on what he earns, registers for the draft, owns a registered firearm, occasionally drinks a beer, sometimes plays the state lottery, and lives in a government-inspected and approved house with a government-inspected and approved deck out back. The two live... Yeah, I was afraid of that, Vince. Don't do it next time. The two live otherwise similar lives, with both being productive and with neither robbing or assaulting anyone else. Their behaviors, choices, and lifestyles are very similar in almost every way, except that there are laws against the actions of individual A, but not against those of individual B. That alone, without any other substantive difference in what they do or how they treat other people, would cause a lot of people to view individual A with a degree of contempt, while viewing individual B with respect and approval. In fact, individual A was accosted, detained, and even physically assaulted, tasered, beaten, and handcuffed by law enforcers, even if he had never threatened or harmed anyone. Many believers in government would opine that he had it coming, that he deserved to be attacked and caged for having disobeyed the commands of politicians. This tendency of onlookers to blame the victims of authoritarian violence is incredibly strong. One who accepts the superstition of authority, the idea that some individuals have the right to forcibly dominate others and that those others have a duty to comply, will assume that if authority is using violence against a person, it must be justified, and therefore the victims of such violence must have done something wrong. This pattern shows up in different situations. When, for example, US troops kill civilians in some foreign country, many Americans are desperate to believe and therefore automatically assume, without a shred of evidence, that the dead victims must have been insurgents or collaborators, or at least sympathizers with the enemy. Yeah, I realize that, Vince. Well, you know, where is the... I think there's one who I'm still supposed to have as a guest on, and I know they are friends. Vince, what's his name? The one with the crickets. You all know who I'm talking about right now, right? I sometimes have a hard time understanding what he says. And last week I pasted, I should probably paste that again, because it's so telling. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. I'm going to put that in the chat room soon. Equal rights under the law. You think, well, this is about rights, equal rights under the law, right? Well, go and read it and weep. It's really, really outrageous. So this is from him. What's his name? I'm so bad with names. Hal Anthony. Yes. Check him out whenever you can. Alright, where were we? As another example, when the Branch Davidians near Waco, Texas were subjected to a military assault, followed by prolonged physical and mental torture, followed by mass extermination, many Americans were quick to assume that anyone that government would... that sentence doesn't make sense. How do I make sense of this? Many Americans were quick to assume that anyone being in government would do that, must have deserved it. No, that doesn't make sense. This sentence is screwed up, but you get the picture, I guess. The American tyrants fostered this attitude by fabricating various rumors and accusations in order to demonize the victims of that violent, fascistic assault on non-violent people. Yes, Behind the Woodshed. That's the name of his radio. I believe it's on Sundays. And around somewhere in the morning, I think. Or in the shortly after afternoon, somewhere there. Actually, the incident was the result of a publicity stunt, wow, I need to learn to read, by the ATF, based upon rumors that some people in the group possessed illegal gun parts. Many people assumed that if someone was assaulted, prosecuted, or imprisoned by agents of authority, then that person must have done something wrong and must have deserved what was done to him. This assumption may come from a refusal of people to consider the possibility that the government they rely on for protection is actually an aggressor. Or it may come from not wanting to consider the possibility that anyone, including himself, could be the next helpless victim of authoritarian violence, even if he has done nothing wrong. Regardless of the cause, the end result is that, when evil committed in the name of law, many spectators immediately hate the victims and rejoice at the pain and suffering that is inflicted upon them. Alright, we've come to the next heading. which is called obligation to do wrong. Well, everyone is aware that there are laws against robbery and murder, except when they are committed in the name of authority. The average person is completely unaware of the tens of thousands of pages of other government-issued statutes, rules and regulations, federal, state and local. But even when they have very little idea exactly what the law does and does not allow, most people still hold the general belief that obeying the law is a good thing, and that breaking the law is a bad thing. In fact, this is 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, by way of reallibertymedia.com. reallibertymedia.com, Behind the Woodshed with Hal Anthony. Yes, check that out, guys. 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sundays, right? In fact, even when a person is strongly opposed to a particular law, believing it to be unjust, he may still hold a general conflicting belief that laws ought to be obeyed and that it is justified to punish those who disobey. This psychological paradox is quite common. Yeah, I would call it doublethink. In fact, with many people vehemently lobbying to change what they view to be bad laws while supporting the idea that as long as it is a law, people should obey it. Yeah. Such mental contradictions, that's the operative word here, contradictions. When you understand what doublethink is, you get a good idea also of what contradictions are. Such mental contradictions are common in the context of the belief in authority, but are rare outside of it. For example, no one would argue that it is morally wrong to try to steal an old lady's purse, but also morally wrong for the old lady to hang on to her purse. But the concept of a bad law in the mind of one who believes in authority boils down to a similar paradox. A bad command which also is bad to disobey. Yeah, that's totally insane, right? The spectator who believes in authority may view a particular command enacted by the masters and implemented by the enforcers as being unimportant, unnecessary, counterproductive, or even stupid or unjust, while at the same time believing that people still have a moral obligation to obey that command, simply because it's the law. Examples of the effects of such a viewpoint abound, ranging from the mundane to the horrific. Here are a few. Alright. At 2 a.m., a wide open, straight, empty road running through unpopulated farmland, a driver slows down but does not stop at the stop sign at a cross street. A motorcycle cop, hiding 100 yards away behind some bushes, turns on his light. Almost everyone, given those facts, would agree that the driver did not harm or endanger anyone or anyone's property, and yet most people would agree that the cop would have the right to demand payment from the driver via a traffic ticket. In other words, even though they would concede that the only thing bad about what the driver did was that it was technically illegal, they believe that that alone justifies the forcible robbery of the driver. Taking it one step further, if the driver attempted to leave the scene rather than accept the ticket, most spectators would agree that the cop would be right to chase down, capture, and imprison the driver. 2. A A government inspector from a state board of health conducts an inspection of a restaurant. The restaurant is perfectly clean and organized, and the inspector finds no indication that anything there poses any risk to anyone's health. However, he nonetheless finds several technical violations of the local code for restaurants. As a result of those violations, not because they create a danger to anyone, but because they are against the rules, the restaurant owner is fined hundreds of dollars. Again, even though the restaurant owner did not harm or endanger anyone or anyone's property, most people would view it as legitimate for the owner to be robbed by those acting on behalf of government. And if the owner attempted to resist such robbery, whether by trying to conceal the technical violations or bribe the inspector or by refusing to pay the fine, he would be seen as immoral by most people, and the enforcers would be seen as having the right to use whatever means necessary to achieve compliance with the law. Number 3. A man drives his friend home from a party. Knowing he would have to drive, he did not have any alcohol to drink, though his friend did. He drops his friend off and heads home. He notices the police doing a sobriety checkpoint traffic stop ahead and remembers that his friend left his half-full beer bottle in the car. Knowing that it is illegal to have an open container of alcohol in his car, he covers it up. He has not harmed or endangered anyone, and in fact has acted quite responsible, acting as designated driver to make sure his friend would arrive home safely. However, he still broke the law, albeit accidentally, by driving a car with an open bottle of beer in it, and then tried to hide evidence of that fact. If he was caught doing so and arrested, few people would view the cop as the bad guy in the situation. Number 4. A man sells a shotgun with a barrel a quarter of an inch shorter than the law allows. The weapon is no more lethal than his shotgun of a quarter of an inch longer. And no one was involved, threatened, or used violence against anyone. And no one who was involved, threatened, or used violence against anyone. But the man, having been caught with the illegal item, is subjected to a paramilitary invasion of his property, followed by an armed standoff in which several people are killed. Unfortunately, this example is not hypothetical. It happened to Randy Weaver at the incident at Ruby Ridge in 1992. And he was not merely caught selling an illegal shotgun. He was enticed into doing so by undercover law enforcers. Yes, Dan. The word service in English means dienst, which you pasted there in the chat room. Dienst. D-I-E-N-S-T. All right. So think about that. Even so you have now 2 different languages, which tells you that it is service, like a waitress that brings you your coffee, right? That's how that word is also used, right? Or service makes you think of an economy, which is service-based instead of produced goods that are actually worth something. Now it's a selling of services, right? Services are sold or bought. And the whole word service is one of the most, one of the more, I shouldn't say most, but one of the more important words when you would compose a Newspeak dictionary for yourself. Right, that word should be in there. It's been twisted and turned. The result of the armed invasion of the Weaver's property and the subsequent shootout and prolonged siege was that Mr. Weaver's wife and son were killed, and he and a friend were wounded. Though it would be absurd for anyone to claim that there is a moral difference between possessing a shotgun with an 18-inch barrel and possessing a shotgun with a 17 3/4-inch barrel, and even though that allegation was the entire legal justification for the armed assault and confrontation, many spectators would still fault Randy Weaver, viewing him as the bad guy for having allowed himself to be coaxed into breaking an arbitrary, completely irrational, not to mention unconstitutional, law. That is the power of the belief in authority. It can lead many people to view a gang of sadistic murderers, thugs, as the good guys, and to view their victims as the bad guys. To most people, breaking the law without specifying which law has an automatic negative connotation. They view disobedience to authority not merely as dangerous, but as immoral. But to the government believer, something even worse than committing a minor, victimless crime is openly disobeying an agent of authority. The average spectator, when observing the interaction between an authority figure and anyone else, will often view with disdain anyone who does not immediately and unquestioningly answer any question and comply with any request from a man with a badge. Even if the person complies but exhibits an attitude towards the authority figure. Remember the story I told you two or 3 weeks ago? Any attitude other than meek subservience, many spectators will be quick to condemn the one who fails to grovel. And one who runs away from the police, even if he has done nothing wrong in the first place, is viewed with scorn by most. And when someone who runs or hides or refuses to cooperate is beaten up, tortured, or even murdered by law enforcers, many spectators opine that the victim should have done what the police told him to do. Yeah. And when someone actively resists an authority figure, few have the gumption. That's a nice word, never heard that before. Gumption? Is that a typo or what? Gumption. And when someone actively resists an authority figure, few have the gumption to take that person's side under any circumstances, even with mere words. Just as a well-trained dog will not bite its master, even when sadistically maltreated, so those who have been trained to bow to authority are usually psychologically incapable of bringing themselves to lift a finger to defend themselves, much less someone else. Thank you, A-Talk. Right? So, are incapable of bringing themselves to lift a finger to defend themselves, much less someone else, from any aggression committed in the name of the law and government and authority. It's kind of southern, okay. Gumption, shrewd or spirited initiative, and resourcefulness. Okay, that's nice. Good, I learned a new word. Whoop. Indeed, due to their authoritarian indoctrination, most people would more eagerly condemn their fellow victims then join together with their fellow victims to actually resist tyranny. All right? There is, of course, a difference between saying that it is not smart for someone to do something and saying that it is immoral to do something. It is one thing to say that it is stupid for someone to mouth off to a cop, and another to say that doing so is actually immoral, and that one who does so therefore deserves whatever abuse or punishment he receives. Yeah. It's, yeah. I'm thinking about whether I should say this or not. Yeah. Because I have, quote-unquote, talked to officers as well, right? Police officers. And if they don't like you, and you ask for identification, all the cops in the Netherlands, they have identification numbers, right? So 4 numbers. If they don't like you, they will tell you that they are cop number 4045. What do you think that is? It's 4045. It's the years that the Netherlands was at war. The idea of average people imposing justice upon wayward law enforcers exists. What? The idea of average people imposing justice wayward law enforcers existentially. Is that supposed to mean actually? Let's try and read this word, because it says existentially, but the idea of average people imposing justice upon wayward law enforcers actually terrifies statists, even when a law enforcer has done something as serious as committing murder. Right? In the eyes of the well-indoctrinated, the only civilized course of action in such a situation is to beg some other authority to make things right, but never to, quote, take the law into one's own hand, unquote. People may complain about and condemn legal injustice, but few are even able to consider the possibility of engaging in premeditated illegal resistance, even when the agents of government are inflicting vicious brutality upon unarmed, non-violent targets. And if, through prolonged brainwashing, a people can be rendered psychologically unable to resist the oppressions done in the name of authority, then it makes no difference whether those people have the physical means to resist. Modern tyrants and their enforcers are always outnumbered and often outgunned by their victims by a factor of 100 or 1,000 or thousands. Yet tyrants still maintain power, not because people lack the physical ability to resist, but because, as a result of their deeply incalculated belief in authority, they lack the mental ability to resist. As Stephen Biko put it, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Double standard on violence is the next heading. The double standard in the minds of those who have been indoctrinated into authoritarianism when it comes to the use of physical force is enormous. When, for example, a law enforcer is caught on film brutally assaulting an unarmed innocent person, the talk is usually about whether the officer should be reprimanded. Dr. or maybe even lose his job. If, on the other hand, some citizens assault a police officer, nearly everyone will enthusiastically demand, often without even wondering or asking why the person did it, that the person be caged for many years. And if a person resorts to the use of deadly force against a supposed agent of authority, hardly anyone even bothers to ask why he did it. In their minds, no matter what the agent of authority did, it is never okay to kill a representative of the god called government. To the believers in authority, nothing is worse than a cop killer, regardless of what he did. In reality, using deadly force against one who pretends to be acting on behalf of authority is morally identical to using deadly force against anyone else. An act of aggression does not become any more legitimate or righteous simply because it is legalized and committed by those claiming to act on behalf of authority. And using whatever force is necessary to stop or prevent an act of aggression, whether the aggression is legal or not, and whether the aggressor is a law enforcer or not, is justified. Let's see. Morally justified, right? Not lawfully justified. Of course, the risks involved with resisting legal aggression are often much higher, but that does not make it any less moral or justified. Many of the reasons now used by law enforcers to forcibly take people captive, such is engaging. Another sentence I don't get. Probably such as. Many of the reasons now used by law enforcers to forcibly take people captive, such as engaging in peaceful public demonstrations without a permit, or photographing law enforcers or government buildings, or not submitting to random stops and questioning by law enforcers, have no shred of justification when viewed without the authority myth. As such, resisting such fascist thuggery, even if it requires deadly force to do so, is morally justified, albeit extremely dangerous. But most people are literally incapable of even considering such an idea. Even when they recognize unjust oppression, they imagine that the civilized response is to let the injustice happen, and then later beg some other authority to make amends. Alright. So, it's almost 4 o'clock in the Netherlands. Almost 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is ucy.tv. 3 letters, UCY, and then .tv. With the Solvinur Event, we're going to take a little break. And I have some music ready for you guys. So, here we go! Break time!
And Billy Clouds are gay.
Alright guys, that was Poker Face. What's the name of the song? I don't really know actually. What's going to happen? That was Poker Face anyway. What's going on, I guess? I don't know. Let's continue with The Most Dangerous Superstition by Locke and Rose. Let's see, where were we? When faced with legal aggression and oppression, there are only two possibilities. Either the people are obliged to allow law enforcers to inflict all manner of injustice and oppression upon them, and then complain later, or the people have the right to use whatever level of force is necessary to stop such injustice and oppression from occurring. To say, for example, that someone has a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures by government agents, as the Fourth Amendment states, would mean nothing if a victim of such tyranny was obliged to allow it to happen at the same time and then complain about it later. To have a right to be free from such oppression logically implies the right to use whatever force is required to stop such oppression from happening in the first place, even if that requires the killing of police officers. But the very thought terrifies those who have been trained to always bow to authority. Most of those who speak of unalienable rights still balk at the thought of forcibly defending those rights against authoritarian assaults. To say that someone has a right to do something while also saying that he would not be justified in forcibly defending such a right against government incursions is a contradiction, and that's correct. In truth, what most people call rights, they actually perceive as government-granted privileges, which they hope their masters will allow, but which they have no intention of forcibly protecting if such rights are outlawed by government. For example, to have an unalienable right to speak one's mind, a right to freedom of speech, means that the person also has the right to use whatever level of violence it takes, up to and including deadly force, to defend against government agents who try to silence him. Though the point makes loyal believers in authority very uncomfortable, the very concept of a person having an unalienable right to do something also implies the right to kill any law enforcers who attempt to stop him from doing it. But in truth, there is almost nothing that government can do, whether it be censorship, assault, kidnapping, torture, or even murder, which would make the average statist advocate violent, illegal resistance. The reader is invited to test the depths of his own loyalty to the myth of authority by considering the question of what would have to happen before he himself would feel justified in killing a law enforcer. Law enforcers constantly escalate disagreements to the level of violence every time they try to arrest someone or force their way into someone's home or forcibly take someone's property. And authoritarian enforcers will then keep increasing the level of violence they use until they get their way. The result is that people, unless they are willing to engage in open revolution against the entire system, will sooner or later bow to the will of the ruling class or be killed. And though the mercenaries of the state are always using force, or the threat of force, to subdue and subjugate average people, the moment their intended victims respond to violence with violence, most spectators will instantly identify the victim of aggression, the one who used force only to defend against an attack, as the bad guy. This glaring double standard, the idea that it is okay for authority to commit violent acts of aggression on a regular basis, but horribly evil for common folk to ever respond with defensive violence, shows how drastically the belief in authority can warp people's perception of reality. Yes. This touches a bit on, in my mind anyway, Leonard Peikoff, who was a student of Ayn Rand and the idea of what reality is, right? A subjectivist would tell you, or will try to bring forth arguments that whatever you perceive is reality, right? They will say, what's true? This is true for me, but does not have to be true for you, because you have a different perception, right? This is real for me, but not real for you, right? And that's a subjectivist view, which does not jive with the way I see reality. Those are two completely different things, perception and reality. What you do with your perceptions creates the idea that you have of what reality is, but your perceptions do not influence reality. Right? Reality is what it is, regardless of your consciousness, regardless of the state of your senses. Right? Reality is the same for a blind person as it is for one who can see. Right? So your senses, that with which you perceive, have no influence on reality. They are just gateways for you to look out. And then, depending on how you interpret the perception, you get an idea of what reality is. That could be an objectivist view, which apparently Ayn Rand is responsible for that term, objectivism. I'm not sure though. I haven't studied objectivism so much. Only a few pointers that I had from Leonard Peikoff about that. I think reality is much bigger than what Kant would have you believe about this, for instance, or Hume. These are like people that will tell you that your senses are inadequate. I don't think so. I think the interpretations of the perceptions are inadequate. Right? Anyway, that's what it made me think of when perception and reality are, mentioned in one sentence. Let's continue. Ironically, in considering other places and other times, almost everyone accepts and even praises the use of illegal violence, including deadly force, against agents of government. Yes, in other cases, right? Few people, like for instance in the Second World War, like he's going to give us as an example now. Few people would still insist that the Jews who lived in 1940 Germany should have continued to try to work within the system by voting and petitioning the Third Reich for justice. Instead, those who illegally hid, ran away, or even forcibly resisted, as occurred in the Warsaw Ghetto, are now seen by almost everyone as having been justified in doing so, even though they were technically criminals, lawbreakers, and even cop killers. But authoritarians in their own time and in their own country not only continue to condemn any who illegally try to avoid or resist oppression, but cheerfully gloat over the suffering of such people when they are punished by government. To delight in a tax cheat being punished, for example, as many Americans do, is akin to a slave taking pleasure in the whipping of a fellow slave who tried to escape. There may be an aspect of simple envy in this, a feeling that if one subject has been victimized, it is not fair that another escaped such suffering. This contributes to the fact that taxpayers, those who have been forcibly extorted by the ruling class, often express resentment of anyone who has avoided being similarly extorted. Oddly, the victims of legal robbery often imagine themselves to be virtuous for having been robbed, and look down on those, for whatever reason, have not been robbed. Alright, we're up to the next heading, which is called The Danger of Inaction. One who views breaking the law as inherently bad, regardless of what the law is, may be quick to report to the authorities any illegal activities he is aware of, even if the activities are victimless and constitute neither force nor fraud. Likewise, those who sit on juries in government courtrooms, if they imagine disobedience to authority, breaking the law, to be inherently immoral, are likely to give their blessing to someone being punished, sometimes quite harshly, for doing something which harmed no one and did not constitute either fraud or violence. In the case of the snitch and the juror, however, such actions take one out of the role of a mere spectator and move him into the role of a collaborator of oppression. The damage done by the belief in authority among the spectators of oppression comes more often from their inaction rather than from their action. Time after time, oppressions, large and small, have been... Hold on, guys. Alright. Let's try this again. The damage done by the belief in authority among the spectators of oppression comes more often from their inaction rather than from their action. Time after time, oppressions, large and small, have been committed right under the noses of basically good people who did nothing about it. To a certain degree, this is the result of simple self-preservation. A person may avoid getting involved simply because he fears for his own safety. But the Milgram experiment showed quite clearly that even without any underlying threat to themselves, most people feel irresistibly compelled to obey authority even when they know that what they are being told to do is wrong and harmful to others. And if they find it difficult to disobey a perceived authority, they will find it even more difficult, if not impossible, to bring themselves to intervene when an authority is exerting its will on someone else. The result of the spectators having been trained to be passive, obedient, non-confrontational can be seen in the many instances throughout the world and throughout history of dozens, hundreds or even thousands of spectators standing around like zombies watching as agents of authority assault or murder innocent people. Even in the United States, the supposed land of the free and home of the brave, videos continue to surface depicting police brutality occurring right in front of crowds of onlookers who simply stand and watch, not lifting a finger to protect their fellow man against the evils committed in the name of authority. Moving on to next chapter, I guess. Part 3E. The effects of the myth on the advocates. Legalized aggression is the next heading. While most people probably imagine themselves to be spectators when it comes to authoritarian oppression and injustice, in truth nearly everyone is actually an advocate of government violence in one form or another. Anyone who votes, regardless of the candidate, or even verbally supports some policy or program of the government is condoning the initiation of violence against his neighbors, even if he does not recognize it as such. This is because law is not about friendly suggestions or police requests. Every so-called law enacted by politicians is a command, backed by the threat of violence against those who do not obey. As George Washington put it, government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Most people, in their day-to-day lives, are very reluctant to use threats or physical force against their fellow man. Only a tiny fraction of many personal disagreements that occur lead to violent conflicts. However, because of their belief in government, nearly everyone advocates widespread violence without even realizing it. And they feel no guilt about doing so, because they perceive threats and coercion to be inherently legitimate when they are called law enforcement. Everyone knows what happens if someone gets caught breaking the law. It may only be a fine, a demand for payment on the threat of force, or it may be an arrest, forcibly taking someone captive. Or it may even result in law enforcers killing someone who continues to resist. But every law is a threat, backed by the ability and willingness to use deadly force against those who disobey. And anyone who honestly considers the idea will recognize that fact. But the belief in authority leads to a strange contradiction in how people see the world. Almost everyone advocates that law be used to coerce others to do something. Almost everyone advocates that law be used to coerce others to do certain things or to fund certain things. However, while advocating such violence, knowing full well the consequences to any who are caught disobeying it, those same advocates fail to recognize that what they are advocating is violence. There are millions, for example, who consider themselves to be peaceful, civilized people, some even proudly wear the label of pacifist, while advocating armed robbery against everyone they know, as well as millions of strangers. Yeah. They see no contradiction because the robbery is given the euphemism taxation and is carried out by people who are imagined to have the right to commit robbery in the name of government. The level of denial which the belief in authority creates is profound. When advocating political violence, people accept no responsibility for the results. Those who apply for government benefits, for example, are asking to receive loot forcibly stolen from their neighbors via taxation. Likewise, applying for a government job amounts to asking that one's neighbors be forced to pay one's salary. Whether the person receives a direct payment or some service, program or other benefit, he will usually accept the stolen property without the slightest hint of shame or guilt. He may otherwise be perfectly neighborly to the people whom he asked the state to rob. Vincent put another PDF in the link in the chat room. You could probably Google this as well if you're listening later and want to hear more by Larkin Rose. This is called How to Be a Successful Tyrant, the Megalomaniac Manifesto by Larkin Rose. .pdf. Alright, so you can check that out. Thank you, Vince. Well done. Continuing, he may otherwise be perfectly neighborly. Yeah, that's what I just said. In no other situation does such a strange mental disconnect occur, not only for the one advocating the act of aggression, but also for the victim of it. If, for example, one person had paid an armed thief to break into his neighbor's house and steal some of his valuables, and the neighbor knew he had done so, such neighbors would probably not be on friendly terms, to say the least. Yet when the same thing is done using authority via elections followed by legislative theft, neither the thief nor the victim usually perceives anything wrong with it. Alright, and here comes another personal note by Larkin Rose. I've lost count of how many people have expressed sympathy for me and my wife because we were imprisoned for not bowing to the IRS, but it never seems to occur to our non-anarchist acquaintances that we were caged by the very people they voted for disobeying commands which they advocated. As far as I know, not one statist we know has even noticed the schizophrenia and hypocrisy of actively supporting mass extortion, that is, taxation, and then given heartfelt condolences for the victim of that same extortion. Yeah, that's totally double think. Coffee. Let's see. One can see the supernatural essence of authority in the fact that among the people who will eagerly vote for their neighbors to be legally extorted and robbed, few would ask or pay mere mortals to do the same thing. Few people would feel justified in hiring a street gang to rob his neighbor in order to pay for his own child's schooling, but many millions advocate the same thing when they condone property taxes to fund public schools. Why do the two feel so morally different to them? Because those who believe in government believe it consists of something more than the people in it. It is imagined to have the rights that no mere mortal has. From the perspective of the statist, asking government to do something has far more in common with praying for the gods to do something than it does when asking people to do something. A statist who demands certain legislation would be horrified and offended if some group of average people offered to provide similar services. Imagine if a street gang made the following offer to a local resident. We'll do a shakedown of your neighbors and use what we get to pay for things you want your kid going to school, fixing the roads, stuff like that. We have to keep a cut ourselves, of course, and tell us how you wish your neighbors would behave, and we'll make sure that they behave that way. And if they don't do what we say, we take their stuff or stick them in a cage. If average people made such an offer, they would be condemned for their attempted thuggery. But when the same things are proposed in a campaign speech by someone running for a position in government, and when such things are done in the name of vague political abstractions such as the common good or the will of the people, they are seen not only as allowable, but as noble and virtuous. When the politicians say, we need to provide adequate funding for our children's education and we need to invest in our infrastructure, he is literally talking about forcibly taking money away from people via taxes and spending it the way he thinks it should be spent. Such aggression is accepted and justified when done in the name of authority, but recognized as immoral if done by mere mortals. This shows that, in the mind of the statist, government is something more than a collection of human beings. Paradoxically, the statist will insist that everything that government is allowed to do, and everything it is, comes from the people. All belief in government requires the absurd cult-like belief that, by way of pseudo-religious political documents and rituals, constitutions, elections, appointments, legislations, and so on, a bunch of mere mortals could conjure into existence an entity that possesses superhuman rights, rights not possessed by any of the people who created it. And once the people hallucinate the existence of such a thing, they will eagerly beg that thing to forcibly control and extort their neighbors. People recognize that mere mortals have no right to do such thing, but truly believe that a deity called government has every right to do such things. Next heading. Excuses for aggression. Though democracy is often praised as the height of civilization, cooperation and getting along, it is the exact opposite. Voting is an act of aggression, and loving democracy amounts to loving widespread violence and constant conflict. Political elections are not about togetherness, unity or tolerance, they are about arguing over how everyone should be forced to behave and what everyone should be forced to financially support via the control machine called government. The abundance of campaign signs littering lawns prior to every election are not the sign of an enlightened free society. They are the sign of a mentally and physically enslaved society, bickering over which slave master they want holding the whip. Yep, very good point. Every single person who votes, Democrat, Republican or third party, is attempting to put people into power who will carry out large-scale extortion, taxation, to fund various government programs. Any candidate who suggested doing away with all such robbery entirely, repealing all taxes, would be ridiculed as an extremist cook. All voters attempt to empower a gang that they know will commit mass robbery, yet none of these voters accept any responsibility for doing so. They know what their candidates will do if put into power. They know what the consequences will be to any who then disobey the commands of those politicians. But the belief in authority makes the voters psychologically incapable of recognizing that what they are doing is advocating widespread violence. In fact, notwithstanding the traditional mythology and rhetoric, no one who believes in government actually wants it to be administered with the so-called consent of the governed. If it were actually done via genuine consent, it would mean that each person's political preferences would be imposed only upon himself, unless others happen to advocate the exact same agenda. Obviously, the goal of the voter is not to compel himself to financially support things he likes, nor is it to control his own choices and behaviors. The goal of every voter is always to use the mechanism of government to coerce other people into making certain choices, funding certain things, and behaving in certain ways. Indeed, the individual statist sometimes has a fairly lax view of his own obligation to obey the myriad of political commands, feeling that he is competent to rely on his own common sense and judgment regardless of the law, while at the same time feeling that everyone else needs to be controlled and micromanaged by authority. He believes that he himself is trustworthy and moral and can make his own decisions, and that the purpose of law is to keep everyone else in line. No. That's some statement about humans, right? I think he's correct. The degree to which different voters want authority to... let's try this again. The degree to which different voters want authority controlling others varies significantly. The constitutionalist wants the federal government to force others to fund only those things specifically designated as federal matters by the US Constitution. Right? It's still force, right? The progressive, on the other hand, wants government to force others to fund all sorts of things, from art to defense, to caring for the poor, to education, to retirement programs, and so on ad infinitum. But while the two types of voters may differ in the degree and types of aggression they support, they do not differ in principle. They both have accepted the premise that authority has the right to forcibly extort money for government functions that are deemed necessary. They differ only on what counts as necessary. The thinking of almost every statist is paradoxical. On the one hand, statists know that every law they condone is a command backed by a threat of violence. They are fully aware of the things that are done to any lawbreaker who gets caught. But the average statist, when asked, will vehemently deny that he condones the initiation of violence against his neighbors. Yeah. On a practical level, the statist knows that any political agenda he supports will, if enacted, be administered by whatever level. Intimidation or brute force is necessary to obtain compliance from the people. Yet, the average statist, while being fully aware of this, will also exhibit a huge logical disconnect, refusing to admit that he is openly and directly advocating the forcible extortion and coercive control of millions of innocent people. The reason for this is that the statist believes that the entity called authority has the right to rule, and as a result, when it commits violence, it does not count as violence. As long as the violence is done by those claiming to be authority, who are imagined to have an exemption from the usual rules of morality, even those who are the most ardent proponents of various taxes and other laws can continue to imagine themselves to be peaceful, compassionate, non-violent people. Some even imagine themselves to be pacifists, because everything government does is via force, or threat of force. There is no such thing, and can be no such thing, as a statist pacifist. While obviously not all anarchists are pacifists, all true pacifists are anarchists. Oh. Huh. Not all A's are P's, but all P's are A's. Alright. Does that make sense? Let's see. Not all A's are P's. Alright? Not all A's are P's. How do you put that? So some A's are P's. But all P's are A's? Does that make sense? Is that logical? Yes, it's logically valid. Alright, just wanted to check that. Alright, so while obviously not all anarchists are pacifists, all true pacifists are anarchists. There are many ways, a few of which are addressed below, in which otherwise decent, virtuous people condone aggression and assault, intimidation and, and robbery. I'm starting to lose my voice. Sorry about that, guys. Because they believe that it is perfectly allowable for the superhuman, mythical deity known as government to commit such acts, and therefore believe that it is perfectly moral and virtuous for them to ask government to commit such acts. Alright, we've come to the next heading. Blah, blah. What's this? I'm just checking the chat, guys. Deny what? Blah. Deny what, guys? What are you talking about? Don't you know? Deniers are taking a pill called Alleviated. It alleviates them from any responsibility. Deniers of what exactly are you talking about, Phoenix? I'm just interested in what's going on in the chat, you know. Blah. Let's see, what are they talking about? Facebook, yay! Chemtrails. Is that what it is? Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting topic, to say the least. I've talked about that many times. And it is the first time somebody pointed me to that whole idea. I was like, what are you saying, right? This sounds just so insane, right? You know. But then, when I started thinking about it, I had a recollection of me, and this was like must have been like something like 1990 or so, or 1989 or 91, somewhere around there. I was just walking down the street, and I saw a photographer. And I'm thinking, okay, this dude, you know, he makes photographs outside, right? And he studies his pictures, you know, what did he photograph, right? And so I asked him, I said, did you notice these stripes in the sky? And he said, yeah, you noticed them. And I asked him, well, do you know what they are? He says, no, I have no clue, but they grow bigger and bigger as time passes on. And so we had a little talk about this, and I told him that this doesn't make sense, because if it were just water vapor, it should just go away. It should just not be visible after a while anymore. And he said, no, this is not the case. They keep lingering, and they grow bigger as time passes on. And I have many photographs of those. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. At least one person agrees with what I was perceiving, right? But I thought nothing of it further anymore. I was just like, okay, well, here's another unexplained phenomena. You know, you don't, when you're quote-unquote asleep, as I would classify myself in those years, you don't assume that there's something bad going on when you spot things that are kinda out of tune, you know? You don't assume that there might be some malevolent force doing its work here. Because you think, well, you know, you think that most people are like you are, and that you don't want to do harm to other people, right? So I just let it slip. And then later, after years and years of research into the events of 11 September 2001, I came into contact with other people that pointed me to this phenomena. And they started mentioning it as a, a very strange happening, and they also could not specifically say what was exactly going on. Nowadays, you hear a lot of voice for it being geoengineering. Personally, I disagree with that idea. If that was all, you know, I would be happy. If that was the only thing that it was supposed to do, fine by me, you know, who cares? But I think it has a much more sinister purpose than that, you know? I think it's much worse than just people trying to influence the weather, you know? That's just me being suspicious, I guess. But like I said, if it's only influencing the weather, then I'm like, okay, whatever, you know. Yeah, Light of Phoenix, you probably tried to paste a YouTube channel. Now, they don't link. If you pick any of the videos that are on that channel and then paste that will work. Alright? So, try that, Phoenix. You should be able to do so. Because I'm guessing you tried to paste a YouTube channel. I don't know, I'll type it in the chat also. Nah, yep. It's not pitch, but pick. Yeah. All right. Next heading, charity through violence. Yeah. Did we already read something of this or not? No, I don't think so. Yes, we did. No, we didn't. The typical status is profoundly schizophrenic. I'm thinking we just read this, but... There you go, Phoenix. That's it. Being both completely... Yep. Alright, let's try this again. The typical status is profoundly schizophrenic, being both completely aware and completely unaware. Yes. It's, he types the unaware in italic. Right? And I would probably agree with these terms. This is how doublethink works. It's that you're simultaneously aware and unaware of certain things. Alright? Being both completely aware and completely unaware that he personally advocates the widespread use of violence against others. A dramatic example of this would be those who view themselves as loving and compassionate for supporting government programs to help the poor. What they are literally advocating via their support of welfare programs is a massive extortion racket in which many millions of human beings are robbed of billions of dollars via the threat of being caged. Proponents of such charity through violence imagine themselves to be virtuous and caring because of what they needy may receive, while completely disassociating themselves from the threat, intimidation, harassment, forced seizures and imprisonments which they know occur and which they know are essential to any welfare program. Because of this bizarre selective denial, those who believe in government can be totally aware of the brute force by which such laws are implemented, while being seemingly unaware that they themselves are condoning such brute force when they demand such laws. Right? And so, this is me speaking, so in order that they don't drive themselves insane, they use doublethink. You understand? The belief in authority is what allows for this strange psychological contradiction, as it convinces the advocates of wealth redistribution schemes that the victim of legal extortions have an obligation to cooperate, and that the use of violence against those who do not pay their taxes is therefore justified. As a result, the basic measure of morality and virtue is turned completely on its head, with welfare advocates viewing themselves as compassionate for advocating violent theft, while viewing as despicable criminals any who try to avoid or resist that violence. Similarly, advocates of Social Security, a Ponzi-style wealth redistribution scheme, imagine themselves to be caring and compassionate. Blinded by their belief in government, they fail to recognize that they are not only forcing people into what is falsely represented as a government-run retirement scheme, but also adding insult to injury by insinuating that people cannot and should not be trusted to plan for their own futures. It takes a serious disconnect with reality for someone to vehemently support coercing people into participating in an investment program which invests in nothing and has no assets, and which has a return far worse than most real investments, and actually does not guarantee any return at all. And then to feel noble and charitable for having forced people in such a scheme. Not only is there no social security account, individually or collectively, that is paid into, but the US Supreme Court in Fleming versus Nestor 363 US 603 has made it clear that no one has any contractual rights to any social security benefits at all, regardless of how much they may have paid into the system, and that Congress can cut off any or all benefits anytime it wants. Alright. Hoppala. Next heading, Advocates of Brutality. Quite often, throughout history, heinous oppression has been supported by the people in part because the people were unable to recognize evil as evil when it was committed in the name of law and authority. If the people truly believe that government has the right to rule, as almost everyone now believes, all sorts of authoritarian solutions will be supported, or at least passively accepted by most people. For example, many Germans in the 1940s, who themselves would never commit or condone private intimidation or assault, much less murder, nonetheless eagerly supported the idea of a legislative, government-approved and government-administrated solution to the so-called Jewish problem, as Hitler called it. It was officially sanctioned and done via law, so the people imagined themselves to be blameless for whatever happened, even if they vehemently advocated it. Americans today, suffering from selective denial, are quick to righteously condemn what other violent, oppressive regimes have done, but slow to recognize that, as a result of their own belief in authority, they too condone widespread draconian brutality in the name of the law, even when oppression goes beyond mere threats and intimidations, and leads to constant, widespread, open violence and brutality. Most people, as a result of their belief in authority, are still unable to recognize it as evil. Is that so, Vince? Well, if anyone that usually listens to Real Liberty Media or worldtruth.org now hears me, you are welcome. I'm under. Vincent has told me that UCY and Real Liberty Media are friends. Worldtruth.org. I've heard Hal Anthony speak about that. I haven't checked that website out myself, though I think I've done it once, like a year ago or so. Yeah, it would be good if smaller radio stations got together and started working together, right? It's a good idea. An obvious example is war. The nationalism that is so strong in authoritarians blinds them to the absolute evil which they condone and support in the name of national defense. In many cases, this blindness is intentional. Politicians and conservative voters alike complain when the blunt realities of war are shown to the American people. They want to wave their flag and cheer for their team, enthusiastically participating in the pact mentality, but they do not want to have the actual see the real world result of what it is they support. They can be persuaded to proudly support the troops and believe in a supposedly righteous war in the abstract, as long as they are sheltered from having to see the carnage, blood, guts and body parts which their patriotism is causing. Alright, it's 58, which means my end tune is coming soon, so I'd like to thank everybody in the chat. Fedminon, or Fedmin1, something like that. 8 Hawks, Del, Dan, Joe, Jules, Phoenix, Vince, and Cap Gringo, and One and None.
The very word secrecy is repugnant.
Thanks, everybody.
Open society. And we are
I'll be back in 2 weeks, because
inherently
next
and
week
historically
I'm going to
opposed
ask
secret societies,
Jules to
secret
put up
oaths,
something,
and to secret proceedings.
because I got other things to do. So see you in 2 weeks,
The New World
guys.
Order is emerging.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of